The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the Apache camp as the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains. Maria Spotted Eagle sat outside her family's wickiup, her skilled hands weaving patterns into a basket while her heart carried the weight of recent events. The year was 1883, and tensions between her people and the white settlers had reached a dangerous peak. Maria was not like other Apache women. She had learned English from the missionaries who occasionally visited their territory, and she possessed a fierce intelligence that impressed even the tribal elders. Her father, Chief Running Bear, often sought her counsel on matters concerning their people's future. But today her mind was focused on one person above all others, Thomas McKenna, the Irish settler she had secretly married 3 months ago. Thomas had arrived in Apache territory 2 years earlier, not as a soldier or a gold seeker, but as a man running from his own troubled past. He had deserted from the cavalry after witnessing the massacre of innocent Apache families at Cañon del Muerto. The guilt had eaten away at his soul until he could no longer wear the blue uniform or follow orders that went against his conscience. When he stumbled into Running Bear's camp, half dead from thirst and exhaustion, Maria had been the one to nurse him back to health. Their love had bloomed slowly, like a desert flower after rare rainfall. Thomas learned Apache customs and language, proving his worth by helping the tribe with his knowledge of military tactics and settler movements. He had shown genuine respect for Apache traditions and had even participated in sacred ceremonies. When they married in a secret Apache ritual by the river, both knew they were crossing boundaries that could cost them everything. The trouble began when a patrol of cavalry soldiers discovered evidence of Thomas's presence in the camp. Captain William Hartley, Thomas's former commanding officer, had been hunting his deserter for months. Hartley was a cruel man who believed the only good Apache was a dead Apache, and he saw Thomas's defection as the ultimate betrayal. When Apache scouts reported soldiers approaching their camp, Thomas insisted on leaving to protect Maria and her people, but it was too late. The soldiers surrounded the camp before dawn, their rifles gleaming in the early morning light. Captain Hartley rode into the center of the camp with a squad of 20 men, his cold blue eyes scanning the faces of the Apache families who had emerged from their dwellings. The children clung to their mothers' skirts while the men stood ready to defend their home, though they were vastly outnumbered. "I know you're here, McKenna." Hartley's voice boomed across the camp. "Come out now and we might spare these savages the consequences of harboring a deserter." Thomas stepped forward from behind Chief Running Bear's wickiup, his hands raised but his head held high. He had grown lean and strong during his time with the Apache, his once pale skin now bronzed by the desert sun. His green eyes met Maria's across the camp, and she saw the love and regret reflected in them. He had chosen to protect her people by surrendering himself. "I'm here, Captain," Thomas said calmly. "These people have done nothing wrong. They gave shelter to a dying man, nothing more." Hartley's laugh was harsh and cold. "Nothing more? You've been living among these heathens like one of them. You've forgotten you're a white man, McKenna. But don't worry. We'll remind you." The captain gestured to his men who moved forward to bind Thomas's hands behind his back with rough rope. Maria watched in growing horror as they treated the man she loved like a common criminal. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she realized what was happening. They were taking him away and she might never see him again. Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his weathered face grave with concern. "This man has shown honor among our people," he said in careful English. "He has earned the right to be treated with respect." "Respect?" Hartley spat on the ground. "This yellow-bellied deserter has no honor. He ran from his duty, abandoned his country, and took up with enemies of the United States. The only respect he'll get is a quick death by firing squad." The words hit Maria like physical blows. Death by firing squad. They were going to execute Thomas for desertion and for choosing love over loyalty to a country that demanded the destruction of her people. She felt her legs grow weak, but her spirit burned with determination. She could not let this happen. She would not let them take away the only man who had ever seen her as more than just another Apache woman. As the soldiers prepared to leave with their prisoner, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She pushed through the crowd of her people, ignoring her father's warning calls. Her long black hair streamed behind her as she ran toward the soldiers, her voice rising in desperate appeal. "Wait," she cried in English, causing several soldiers to turn in surprise. "Please, you must listen to me." Captain Hartley held up his hand, stopping his men. He looked at Maria with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Well, well, what have we here? An Apache squaw who speaks the white man's tongue? I am Maria Spotted Eagle, daughter of Chief Running Bear, she said, drawing herself up to her full height. And Thomas McKenna is my husband. The camp fell silent except for the wind rustling through the mesquite bushes. Even the soldiers seemed shocked by her declaration. Hartley's face twisted with disgust and rage as the implications of her words sank in. Your husband? He snarled. This deserter married a savage? That makes his crimes even worse. He is a good man, Maria said firmly, her voice carrying across the camp. He chose peace over war, love over hate. If that makes him a criminal in your eyes, then your laws are wrong. Hartley's hand moved to his sidearm and Maria saw death in his eyes. But she also saw something else, an opportunity. If she could make him angry enough, perhaps he would make a mistake. Perhaps she could find a way to save Thomas, even if it meant sacrificing herself. The desert wind continued to blow, carrying with it the promise of a storm that would test every heart in the camp before the sun set again. Captain Hartley's face turned red with fury at Maria's bold declaration. The idea that a white man, even a deserter, had married an Apache woman filled him with the kind of rage that made men do terrible things. He had spent years fighting what he called the Indian problem, and believed that mixing races was an abomination that weakened both sides. You filthy savage, he spat at Maria, his hand still resting on his pistol. You seduced a white man away from his duty. You're as much to blame for his crimes as he is. Thomas struggled against his bonds, his face flushed with anger. Leave her alone, Hartley. Your quarrel is with me, not with her or her people. My quarrel is with anyone who stands against the United States Army, Hartley replied coldly. And that includes any Apache who harbors deserters. He turned to his men. Search the camp. If we find any evidence of other deserters or stolen military property, we'll arrest the whole tribe. The soldiers began moving through the camp, overturning baskets, searching wiki-ups, and frightening the children with their rough handling of Apache belongings. Maria watched in growing desperation as they violated the sacred spaces of her people. She knew they would find nothing criminal, but she also knew that men like Hartley didn't need real evidence to justify their actions. Chief Running Bear stepped forward again, his voice calm but firm. Captain, we have shown you that we have nothing to hide. We have given you the man you seek. Leave us in peace. Peace? Hartley laughed bitterly. There can be no peace while Apaches roam free in American territory. Your time is coming, old man. Soon all your people will be on reservations where they belong. Maria felt her heart sink as she realized the truth behind the captain's words. This wasn't just about Thomas. This was about something much larger and more terrible. The government wanted all Apache people removed from their ancestral lands, and men like Hartley were the tools they used to accomplish this goal. But as she watched the soldiers ransack her home, Maria also noticed something else. Several of the younger soldiers looked uncomfortable with their orders. They avoided meeting the eyes of Apache children and seemed reluctant to handle sacred objects. One soldier, a boy who couldn't have been more than 18, actually helped an elderly Apache woman pick up scattered cornmeal after another soldier had knocked over her storage jar. Maria filed this observation away in her mind. If some of these soldiers had consciences, perhaps there was hope yet. She needed to think like Thomas had taught her, like a strategist rather than just a grieving wife. She needed to find a weakness in Hartley's position and exploit it. As the search continued, Maria moved closer to where Thomas stood guarded by two soldiers. She spoke to him in Apache, knowing that most of the soldiers wouldn't understand. My heart, are you hurt? She asked softly. I am well, Thomas replied in the same language. But I fear for you and your people. This man Hartley has darkness in his soul. We will find a way, Maria whispered. The mountain teaches us that even the hardest stone can be worn away by water if we are patient. One of the guards prodded Thomas with his rifle. No talking in that heathen tongue, he ordered. Maria switched back to English. I was only asking if he needed water. Even prisoners deserve basic mercy. The guard looked uncertain and Maria pressed her advantage. Surely the great United States Army shows more honor than to let a man die of thirst. Before the guard could respond, Captain Hartley's voice rang out across the camp. Sergeant Morrison, what did you find? A grizzled sergeant emerged from Chief Running Bear's wiki-up, holding a cavalry saber and several military-issue items. Maria's heart sank as she recognized them. They were gifts Thomas had brought when he first came to the tribe, tokens of his former life that he had offered in friendship. "Found these hidden under some blankets, sir," Morrison reported. "Looks like stolen military property." Thomas started to speak, but Hartley cut him off. "More evidence of your crimes, McKenna. Not only did you desert, but you gave military equipment to the enemy." "Those were mine to give," Thomas protested. "My personal belongings, not stolen goods." "Everything a soldier owns belongs to the Army," Hartley replied. "You had no right to give away government property." He turned to Chief Running Bear. "Old man, harboring a deserter is one thing, but possessing stolen military equipment makes you an enemy combatant." Maria saw the trap closing around her people and felt desperation claw at her throat. Hartley was using any excuse he could find to justify what he had probably planned from the beginning, arresting or killing Apache people. She had to do something before the situation spiraled completely out of control. "Captain Hartley," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the camp, "I challenge your right to take these actions." Every eye in the camp turned to her. Even Hartley looked surprised by her boldness. Apache women were known for their strength and courage, but few would dare challenge a military officer so directly. "You challenge me?" Hartley's voice dripped with disdain. "On what grounds, squaw?" "On the grounds that you exceed your authority," Maria replied, drawing on everything Thomas had taught her about military law. "You were sent to capture one deserter, not to make war on peaceful people." "These people stopped being peaceful the moment they aided and abetted a criminal," Hartley shot back. "Then prove it in a proper court," Maria said boldly. "Arrest Thomas if you must, but leave my people alone. Let a judge decide whether showing mercy to a dying man constitutes a crime." Hartley's eyes narrowed as he studied Maria more carefully. She could see his mind working, trying to decide whether this Apache woman posed a real threat to his plans or was simply desperate. What he didn't know was that Maria had been listening to Thomas's stories about military protocol for months, learning everything she could about the white man's laws and customs. "You speak well for a savage," Hartley admitted grudgingly. "But the law is clear. Anyone who aids an enemy of the United States forfeits the protection of that law." "Then show me this law," Maria challenged. "Bring forth the papers that say a woman loses her life for giving water to a thirsty man." Several of the younger soldiers exchanged glances, and Maria could see doubt creeping into their faces. She was gambling everything on the hope that some of these men still believed in justice, even if their captain did not. The desert wind picked up, swirling dust around the camp and adding to the tension that crackled in the air like lightning before a storm. Maria stood straight and proud, facing down the most dangerous man in the territory while her husband watched helplessly, and her people waited to see whether courage or cruelty would win the day. Captain Hartley stared at Maria for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were chewing something bitter. The Apache woman's challenge had caught him off guard, and he could see some of his own men shifting uncomfortably. He had expected to ride into this camp, collect the deserter, and perhaps teach these savages a lesson about the consequences of defying the United States Army. He had not expected to be questioned about legal authority by an Indian woman who spoke better English than half his soldiers. "You want to see the law?" Hartley finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The law is what I say it is out here in this God-forsaken wilderness. The law is that the United States government has declared all Apache people to be hostile enemies, and enemies have no rights." "That is not true," Maria replied steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "President Chester Arthur signed the Apache Peace Treaty just last year. My people are no longer at war with the United States." Thomas looked at his wife with amazement and pride. Even bound and helpless, he marveled at her courage and intelligence. She had paid attention to every conversation they had shared about politics and law, storing away information that might someday save her people. Now she was using that knowledge to fight for their lives with nothing but words as weapons. Sergeant Morrison cleared his throat nervously. "Captain, she might have a point about that treaty. I remember hearing something about new agreements with some of the Apache tribes." Hartley whirled on his sergeant with fury in his eyes. "Are you questioning my orders, Morrison?" "No, sir," Morrison replied quickly. "Just pointing out what I heard, sir." But the damage was done. Maria could see doubt spreading among the soldiers like ripples on a pond. These men were far from home, following orders from officers who sometimes cared more about advancement than justice. When someone offered them a reason to question those orders, some of them were willing to listen. Maria pressed her advantage. "Captain, you say you represent the United States government, but the government has made promises to my people. If you break those promises without proper authority, you become the criminal, not us." "You dare call me a criminal?" Hartley's hand moved to his pistol again. "I call you a man who may be making a mistake that will cost him his career," Maria replied coolly. "When your superiors learn that you attacked a peaceful Apache camp without proper orders, what do you think will happen to you?" The question hung in the desert air like smoke. Maria knew she was taking an enormous risk by threatening a man like Hartley, but she also knew that bullies often crumbled when someone stood up to them with confidence. She had learned this lesson from watching Thomas deal with aggressive soldiers during his time with the cavalry. Young Private Jenkins, the soldier who had helped the elderly Apache woman, stepped forward hesitantly. "Captain, maybe we should just take the deserter and go. We got what we came for." "Did I ask for your opinion, Private?" Hartley snarled. "No, sir, but—" "Then keep your mouth shut." Hartley's face was purple with rage now. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. His carefully planned raid was turning into a debate about law and authority, with an Apache woman making him look like a fool in front of his own men. Chief Running Bear had been watching the exchange with the wisdom of a man who had seen many conflicts in his long life. Now he stepped forward and spoke in a voice that commanded respect. "Captain Hartley," he said slowly, "you are a warrior, and I honor warriors. But a true warrior knows when to fight and when to show mercy. You have captured the man you seek. Take him and go in peace. Let there be no more bloodshed today." "I'll decide when there's been enough bloodshed," Hartley replied, but some of the fire had gone out of his voice. He was beginning to realize that killing Apache people might not be as simple as he had hoped. His men were wavering, and he couldn't afford to lose their loyalty. Maria sensed the shift in momentum and decided to take the biggest risk of her life. She walked toward Captain Hartley, her hands open and empty until she stood just a few feet away from him. Every soldier in the camp had his hand on his weapon, but she showed no fear. "Captain," she said quietly, "I offer you a trade." "What kind of trade?" Hartley asked suspiciously. "Take me instead of my husband." The words fell like stones into a still pond. Thomas cried out in anguish, struggling against his bonds. "No, Maria, I won't let you." "A deserter's wife has value as a prisoner," Maria continued, ignoring Thomas's protests. The newspapers would write stories about the Apache woman who seduced a soldier away from his duty. It would bring you more glory than simply shooting a man who can't fight back. Hartley's eyes lit up with interest despite himself. He was an ambitious man who dreamed of promotion and recognition. The idea of capturing an Apache woman who had supposedly corrupted an American soldier did have a certain appeal. It would make him look like more than just a manhunter, but Thomas was shaking his head frantically. "Don't listen to her, Hartley. She's just trying to protect her people. I'm the one you want." "Actually," Maria said, still looking directly at the captain, "I'm offering you something better than revenge. I'm offering you a way to look like a hero instead of a butcher." She could see the wheels turning in Hartley's mind. He was cruel and ambitious, but he wasn't stupid. He knew that attacking peaceful Apache people might cause problems with his superiors, especially if word reached the newspapers back east. There were people in Washington who were tired of reading about military massacres of Indians. "What exactly are you proposing?" Hartley asked slowly. "Let my husband go free," Maria said. "Take me as your prisoner instead. Tell your superiors that you discovered the Apache woman who corrupted their soldier, and that you brought her to justice. It's a better story than simply executing a deserter." "Maria, no." Thomas's voice was raw with desperation. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me." But Maria had already made her choice. She knew that Thomas might survive as a free man in Apache territory, but he would surely die if the soldiers took him back to face a military tribunal. As for herself, she was gambling that even in a white man's prison, an intelligent Apache woman might find ways to survive and eventually gain freedom. Captain Hartley looked from Maria to Thomas and back again, his mind calculating the advantages of each option. The desert wind continued to blow, stirring up dust devils that danced between the wickiups like spirits preparing for battle. The silence stretched across the Apache camp like a taut bowstring as Captain Hartley considered Maria's proposal. His cold blue eyes moved between the bound deserter and the proud Apache woman who had just offered to trade her freedom for her husband's life. The other soldiers waited nervously, unsure what their unpredictable commander would decide. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Hartley said finally, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Trying to manipulate me with talk of glory and heroism." "I think you're a smart man who knows an opportunity when he sees one," Maria replied calmly. "But if you prefer to explain to your superiors why you started a war with peaceful Apaches, when you were only sent to capture one deserter, that is your choice." Thomas struggled against his bonds with renewed desperation. "Maria, please don't do this. They'll never let you go. You know what happens to Apache prisoners." Maria's heart ached at the pain in her husband's voice, but she kept her expression steady. She knew exactly what happened to Apache prisoners. She had heard the stories of families torn apart, of women sent to distant prisons where they died of diseases their bodies couldn't fight, of children taken away and forced into white schools where they were forbidden to speak their own language. But she also knew what would happen to Thomas if Hartley took him back to face a military court. Desertion during wartime was punishable by death, and Thomas had not only deserted, but had also lived among the enemy. The army would make an example of him to discourage other soldiers from following their consciences instead of their orders. Chief running, Bear stepped closer to his daughter, his weathered face creased with worry. "Little Star," he said softly in Apache, using the pet name he had called her since childhood. "You do not have to do this. We can fight. We can run. We have survived worse than this captain and his soldiers." "No, father," Maria replied in the same language. "Too many of our people have already died because of conflicts between our worlds. If my sacrifice can prevent more bloodshed, then it is the right choice." "I don't understand their heathen gibberish," Hartley interrupted harshly. "Speak English or don't speak at all." Maria turned back to face him, switching to English with fluid ease. "I was telling my father that I stand by my offer. My life for my husband's freedom." Private Jenkins, the young soldier who had shown kindness to the Apache elder, cleared his throat nervously. "Captain, sir, wouldn't it be easier to just take the deserter and go? We're already behind schedule and the men are getting restless." Hartley's eyes flashed with annoyance. "The men will do what they're ordered to do when they're ordered to do it." He studied Maria for another long moment. "You really think you're worth more as a prisoner than that yellow-bellied husband of yours?" "I think," Maria said carefully, "that capturing the Apache woman who supposedly seduced a soldier away from his duty would make a better story for the newspapers than simply executing another deserter. The Eastern papers love stories about savage women corrupting civilized men." She hated describing herself in such terms, but she knew she had to appeal to Hartley's ambition and his prejudices. If he saw her as a trophy that could advance his career, he might be willing to make the trade. Thomas was shaking his head frantically. "She didn't seduce me away from anything, Hartley. I left the army because I couldn't stomach murdering innocent people anymore. Maria had nothing to do with my decision to desert." "That's not how the story would read in the papers," Hartley said slowly, and Maria could see that he was seriously considering her proposal. The brave Captain Hartley tracking down the Apache enchantress who corrupted an American soldier. Yes, that has a nice ring to it. Maria felt sick at the thought of being portrayed as some kind of evil temptress, but she forced herself to nod. Exactly. Much more interesting than just another military execution. Sergeant Morrison had been listening to the conversation with growing unease. He was a career soldier who had served under many officers, and he had learned to recognize when a situation was about to go very wrong. "Captain," he said cautiously, "perhaps we should consider what Colonel Patterson would want us to do. He sent us out here with specific orders to bring back the deserter McKenna. He didn't say anything about taking prisoners or starting fights with peaceful Indians." Hartley whirled on his sergeant with fury. "Are you questioning my judgment, Morrison?" "No, sir," Morrison replied quickly. "Just trying to make sure we follow the colonel's orders exactly as he gave them." But Maria could see that Morrison had planted a seed of doubt in the captain's mind. Military men were trained to follow orders, and smart officers didn't exceed their authority without good reason. If Hartley brought back an unexpected Apache prisoner instead of the deserter he had been sent to capture, he would have to explain his actions to his superiors. "The colonel's orders were to bring back the deserter," Maria said quietly, "but they also gave you discretion in how to accomplish that mission. If you believe that taking me prisoner serves the Army's interests better than executing my husband, then you have the authority to make that choice." Thomas looked at his wife with a mixture of admiration and despair.
Even in this desperate situation, she was thinking strategically, using every advantage she could find.
But he also knew that she was sacrificing herself for him, and the thought was more painful than any physical torture the army could devise. "Maria," he said softly, "if you do this, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to find a way to free you. And I'll spend the rest of mine knowing that you're alive and safe," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Captain Hartley had been watching this exchange with interest. He was beginning to see possibilities in this situation that he hadn't considered before. An Apache woman who was clearly intelligent and well-spoken might indeed be more valuable as a prisoner than a dead deserter. She could be interrogated for information about Apache movements and plans. She could be used as an example to other tribes about what happened when they interfered with army business. "All right," he said finally, "I'll consider your proposal. But first, I want to know exactly what kind of information you might be able to provide about Apache activities in this region." Maria's heart sank as she realized that Hartley wasn't just interested in her as a trophy. He wanted her to betray her own people. She would have to be very careful about what she said next, because the wrong words could doom not just herself, but every Apache man, woman, and child in the territory. Maria felt the weight of every Apache life in the territory pressing down on her shoulders as Captain Hartley waited for her answer. She knew that he wanted her to betray her people in exchange for Thomas's freedom, but she also knew that no information she could provide would ever be enough to satisfy a man like him. He would keep demanding more until she had nothing left to give. "I know the locations of water sources," she said carefully, choosing words that might sound valuable to the captain without actually endangering anyone. "I know which trails are safe for travel and which ones are dangerous because of loose rocks or flash floods." Hartley's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "That's not the kind of information I'm interested in, Squaw. I want to know about war parties, weapons caches, plans for attacks on settlers." "There are no war parties," Maria replied truthfully. "My people signed the peace treaty. We want only to live quietly and raise our children in safety." "Don't lie to me." Hartley's voice cracked like a whip across the camp. "Apache raiders have been hitting supply wagons all along the southern route. Someone's been telling them where to strike." Maria shook her head firmly. "Not my people. Perhaps other Apache bands who did not sign the treaty, but not us. We have kept our word." Thomas could see the frustration building in Hartley's face, and he knew the situation was about to turn ugly. The captain had convinced himself that he could get valuable intelligence from Maria, and when she couldn't provide what he wanted, his anger would turn violent. "Captain," Thomas said loudly, drawing Hartley's attention away from Maria. "She's telling you the truth. Chief Running Bear's people have been peaceful since the treaty was signed. If you want to find the raiders, you need to look elsewhere." "I'll decide who's telling the truth here," Hartley snarled. He turned back to Maria. "Last chance, Squaw. Tell me what I want to know, or your husband dies right here and now." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Maria felt her world narrowing to this single moment, this impossible choice between betraying her people and watching the man she loved die before her eyes. She looked at Thomas and saw him shaking his head slightly, telling her not to sacrifice others for his sake. But before Maria could respond, Chief Running Bear stepped forward with the dignity that had made him a respected leader for more than 20 years. "Captain Hartley," the old chief said in his measured English, "my daughter has offered you a fair trade, her freedom for her husband's life, but you ask for more than was offered. You ask her to betray her own blood, to speak words that would bring death to innocent children." "I ask for what any prisoner of war should provide," Hartley replied coldly. "Information about enemy activities." "We are not your enemies," Running Bear said with quiet strength. "We are people who chose peace over war, who put aside old grievances to build a better future for our children. If you turn us into enemies today, you will answer for that choice to the Great Spirit and to your own conscience." Several of the younger soldiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had signed up to fight hostile Indians, not to threaten peaceful families who were trying to live according to treaty agreements. The moral weight of what they were being asked to do was beginning to press down on them. Private Jenkins spoke up again, his young voice cracking with nervousness. "Captain, sir, maybe the chief is right. These people don't look like hostiles to me. They look like families just trying to get by. Private Jenkins, Hartley's voice was deadly quiet. If you speak out of turn one more time, I'll have you court-martialed for insubordination. But the damage was already done. Maria could see doubt spreading among the soldiers like cracks in a dam. These men were far from home, following orders that didn't sit right with their consciences. When their captain threatened to court-martial one of their own for showing basic human decency, it raised questions about who the real enemy was. Sergeant Morrison cleared his throat carefully. Captain, perhaps we should stick to our original mission. Take the deserter and head back to the fort. Colonel Patterson will want a full report on why we're behind schedule. The colonel will. Get his report when I'm ready to give it, Hartley snapped. But Maria could see that the mention of his superior officer had made him pause. He was beginning to realize that his actions here would have to be justified to men who might not share his enthusiasm for expanding the mission beyond its original scope. Maria decided to take one more desperate gamble. Captain, you have a choice to make. You can return to your fort with the deserter you were sent to capture and report that you completed your mission successfully, or you can return with stories of how you threatened peaceful Apache families who have honored their treaty obligations, and explain to your superiors why that was necessary. She could see Hartley's jaw working as he struggled with his decision. His ambitious nature wanted the glory that might come from capturing an important Apache prisoner, but his survival instincts warned him about the consequences of exceeding his orders. Thomas chose that moment to speak again, his voice carrying clearly across the camp. Hartley, you've got what you came for. You've got me. Don't compound your crimes by attacking innocent people. My crimes? Hartley's attention snapped back to Thomas with laser focus. You're the criminal here, McKenna. You're the one who broke his oath and betrayed his country. I broke an oath to an organization that ordered me to murder women and children, Thomas replied steadily. If that makes me a criminal, then I'm proud to be one. The words hit some of the soldiers like physical blows. They had all heard stories about massacres and questionable orders, but most had tried not to think too hard about the moral implications of their service. Hearing a fellow soldier speak so bluntly about the dark side of their profession forced them to confront uncomfortable truths. Maria watched the interplay of emotions on the soldiers' faces and realized that the tide was beginning to turn. These men were tired, uncertain, and far from home. They had expected to capture a deserter, not to debate the morality of their actions with Apache families. The longer this confrontation continued, the more likely it became that some of them would refuse to follow orders that violated their own sense of right and wrong. Captain Hartley seemed to sense the shifting mood among his men. His face was flushed with anger and frustration as he realized that his carefully planned raid was falling apart around him. He had to make a decision soon, or risk losing control of his soldiers entirely. The desert wind picked up again, swirling dust and debris around the camp like the spirits of ancient warriors preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of everyone present. The tension in the Apache camp reached a breaking point as Captain Hartley stood frozen with indecision, his hand still resting on his pistol. Maria could see the war raging behind his eyes between ambition and caution, between his desire for glory and his fear of consequences. The other soldiers watched their captain with growing unease, waiting for an order that would either end this confrontation peacefully or plunge them all into violence. It was Private Jenkins who finally broke the deadlock. The young soldier stepped forward, his rifle lowered, and spoke in a voice that carried surprising strength for someone so young. "Captain, sir," he said clearly, "I can't be part of threatening these people anymore. They've done nothing wrong except show kindness to a dying man." Hartley's face turned purple with rage. "Private Jenkins, you are relieved of duty and under arrest for mutiny." But Jenkins didn't back down. Instead, he looked around at his fellow soldiers with steady eyes. "Look at them," he said, gesturing toward the Apache families. "Look at the children hiding behind their mothers' skirts. Look at the old people who just want to live in peace. Is this what we signed up for? Is this what America stands for?" One by one, other soldiers began to lower their weapons. Sergeant Morrison was the next to speak, his gruff voice carrying the weight of 20 years of military service. "The boy's right, Captain," Morrison said slowly. "This isn't what we came here to do. We came to arrest a deserter, not to make war on peaceful families. Hartley looked around the camp with growing desperation as he realized he was losing control of his men. "You're all guilty of mutiny," he shouted. "I'll have every one of you court-martialed. Then you'll have to court-martial half the army," another soldier called out. "Because I won't shoot unarmed people either." Maria watched this remarkable scene unfold with a mixture of hope and amazement. She had gambled that some of these soldiers still had consciences, and that gamble was paying off in ways she had never dared imagine. These men were risking their careers and possibly their lives to stand up for what they believed was right. Chief Running Bear stepped forward again, his voice calm and dignified. "Captain Hartley, your own men have shown you the path of honor. Take the deserter if you must, but leave our people in peace. There has been enough suffering in this land." Thomas looked at his wife with eyes full of love and pride. Even facing certain death, he was amazed by what she had accomplished. Through courage and intelligence, she had turned a potential massacre into a moral awakening. She had reminded these soldiers of their humanity when their captain had forgotten his own. "Maria," Thomas said softly, "whatever happens now, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest honor of my life. You've shown me what real courage looks like." But Maria wasn't ready to give up yet. She could see that Captain Hartley was cornered and desperate, which made him more dangerous than ever. A man like him might decide that if he couldn't have glory, he would settle for revenge. "Captain," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade, "you still have a choice. You can be remembered as the officer who showed mercy to peaceful people, or as the man who started a war because his pride was wounded. Which legacy do you want to leave?" Hartley's hand tightened on his pistol as he glared at the Apache woman who had outmaneuvered him. But as he looked around at his own soldiers, he realized that shooting her would probably trigger a mutiny that would end his career and possibly his life. Too many of his men had already chosen conscience over orders. For a long moment, the only sound in the camp was the whisper of wind through the mesquite bushes. Then slowly, Hartley released his grip on his weapon and stepped back. "Cut the deserter loose," he ordered quietly. The soldiers binding Thomas looked confused. "Sir?" one of them asked. "You heard me," Hartley said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Cut him loose." As the ropes fell away from Thomas's wrists, Maria felt her knees go weak with relief, but she forced herself to remain standing, knowing that the danger wasn't completely over yet. Thomas rubbed his wrists where the ropes had chafed them raw, then walked slowly toward his wife. When he reached her, he took her hands in his and looked into her eyes with infinite tenderness. "How did you know?" he asked softly. "Know what?" Maria replied, "That they were still human beings under those uniforms." Maria smiled, the first genuine smile she had worn since the soldiers arrived. "My father taught me that even the hardest stone can be worn away by patient water. And you taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite the fear." Captain Hartley watched this reunion with bitter eyes, but he knew he was beaten. His grand plans for glory had crumbled in the face of one Apache woman's determination and his own soldiers' consciences. Now he had to figure out how to explain this disaster to his superiors. "Sergeant Morrison," he said wearily, "prepare the men to move out." "What about our report, sir?" Morrison asked. "What do we tell the colonel?" Hartley looked around the camp one more time, taking in the scene of Apache families who had been terrorized but not harmed, soldiers who had chosen mercy over orders, and a love story that had somehow managed to triumph over hatred and prejudice. "We tell him we searched the area thoroughly and found no evidence of hostile activity," Hartley said finally. "We tell him that the deserter McKenna was not located during our patrol." Several soldiers exchanged glances of surprise and relief. Their captain was giving them all a way out, a story that would protect them from the consequences of their moral stand. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Private Jenkins approached Chief Running Bear with his hat in his hands. "Sir," the young man said awkwardly, "I want to apologize for the way we treated your people today. It wasn't right." The old chief studied the soldier for a moment, then placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Young warrior," he said gently, "you showed great courage today. Your ancestors should be proud." As the cavalry patrol rode away from the Apache camp, Maria and Thomas stood together watching them disappear into the desert haze. The immediate danger was over, but they both knew that their love story was just beginning. They would face many more challenges in the years to come, but they had learned something important about the power of courage and conscience to overcome hatred and fear. Chief Running Bear joined them as the last soldier vanished from sight. "My daughter," he said proudly, "today you showed that the strongest weapon is not the rifle or the sword, but the human heart that refuses to surrender to evil." Maria leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. "Today we all learned that lesson, Father. Even the soldiers learned it. As the sun began to set over the Apache camp, painting the desert sky in brilliant shades of red and gold, the people gathered around their cooking fires and shared the evening meal. Children who had been hiding in terror just hours earlier now laughed and played as if nothing had happened. The resilience of the human spirit had triumphed once again over those who would destroy it. Thomas and Maria sat together beside their own fire, planning for a future that suddenly seemed possible again. They had survived the test of their love, and in doing so, they had reminded everyone present that hope in humanity could overcome even the darkest hatred. The desert wind that had carried so much tension and fear now brought the promise of cooler evening air and peaceful dreams. In the years that followed, their story would be told around many campfires, inspiring others to choose love over fear, courage over submission, and hope over despair. For in the end, it was not the guns or the uniforms that had determined the outcome of this day, but the simple power of one woman's refusal to let hatred win.